Welcome from me as well, from wherever you are joining us today. We've had registrations for this event from more than 300 different organizations across more than 50 countries. So thank you for taking the time to be here right now. OASPA's Wayfinders are discussions where we learn from organizations that are finding ways to broaden participation in open access, right? And we hope that today's session is going to be informative for you. Now, today's session is a deep dive into Subscribe to Open. And why are we doing that? Well, basically, S2O, Subscribe to Open, is one route to open access that eliminates financial barriers for both authors and readers. So there are no fees for reading the content, and there are no author fees for publishing open access. And so this model represents one way to build more inclusive open access publishing in the ecosystem. But the question is S2O really viable? Isn't it too risky? And really, what even is S2O, right? Let's find out together. This will be a probing conversation to interrogate and better understand the model. And this conversation is based around your questions. So thanks to those who gave us questions when you registered. We've had loads of them, and that's what's shaped this discussion today. And with the panel together, we will do our best to answer you. I say we because I'm joined by a stellar panel. We have Anne from EDP Sciences in the middle of your screen there. EDP Sciences publishes quite a large share of STM and maths content. We have Wendy from Project Muse, a platform for humanities and social sciences. And we have Richard from Annual Reviews, a series of review journals where all the content is invited or commissioned. Huge thanks to all three of them for being willing to have this conversation. Keep your eyes out in chat because you will, through this session, have links and resources shared in chat, and we welcome you to express yourselves and exchange and share resources of your own in chat as well. But if you have a question for us that we aren't answering as we go through the conversation, then please put that in the Q&A area. Not in chat, I won't find it. Please put it in the Q&A area if you have a question. So there are no more slides, and we can dive straight into our first question. So welcome, panelists. And Richard, I will start with you and start at the very beginning. What is Subscribe to Open? And when Annual Review says that your journals are using an S2O model, what do you mean by that?
Thank you, Malavika. Hello, everyone. I'd like to start by acknowledging and thanking OASPA for proposing this event, and to acknowledge the amazing talent and enthusiasm of Malavika and the Events Hub team. I'm honored to be participating with Anne and Wendy, and I'm very grateful to everyone who's joined the meeting and who have submitted questions. I'd like to say it's a bleak day for those of us in the United States. While accepting the result of the election, the ramifications of it are very alarming here, and there are potential impacts all over the world. It creates an even stronger imperative to succeed with Subscribe to Open in order to make rational, accurate knowledge available to everyone. My view is that we need to even go beyond that and translate the work of academia so that it can inform all parts of society all over the world. And I think that we have a responsibility to work together to achieve this by all means possible. So turning to the topic today, Subscribe to Open, or S2O for short, is a collective action approach to open access. Collective action is a strategic collaboration where a group of people work together to achieve a common goal or to address a shared issue. This kind of collective component of S2O sets it apart from APCs and read and publish deals, which are open access approaches undertaken by individual persons, authors or groups of authors, or individual institutions through read and publish agreements. For Annual Reviews journals, what S2O means is that if subscribing institutions continue to subscribe to our journals, and therefore we maintain the revenue that we need to publish, then all of the new content is published open access using CC BY licenses. It's a process that's repeated on an annual basis. If we lose that subscriber support, then the new content would be published behind the paywall. Although we would offer green open access as a backup, that's non-paywalled hosting on institutional repositories. So at one level, a very simple proposition. Another level, it's rather different to other ways of achieving open access. Thanks.
Thanks, Richard. And we'll come back to talk about what happens when those support levels and thresholds aren't met. But for the moment, if I turn to you, Wendy, and say, I know that for you, defining subscribe to open goes hand in hand with the S2O community of practice. And we've talked about that. Why is that for you, Wendy?
Okay, so first, let me say thank you for the opportunity today to represent Muse and speak about subscribe to open. So when it comes to community of practice, I can't celebrate this enough. In the decades that I've been working in scholarly publishing, I've never experienced this type of inspiring, energetic collective, such as the community of practice, as it truly is a community. The participants range, it's publishers, libraries, funders, and if you look on the community of practice site that is linked in the chat, I think it underrepresents how many people are involved in the community. Often on our monthly meetings, you'll have up to 65, 75 people all actively participating in a conversation, and it's a very safe space to discuss the nuances and to sort of generate a collective definition of the model, which helps all of us communicate it. And it's definitely helped in the very beginning, Muse actually form its model. I went into those meetings, I listened to the publishers and the libraries' concerns, and it really did help the model take shape because it is a very transparent and open environment. And this is where you're having organizations share their success stories and stories where they found themselves under supported. And with those stories, we're all learning. So it really, I can't say enough. And, Muse is a wonderful community. And I consider the community of practice an extension of that.
Great, thank you for that, Wendy. And Anne, can I just check with you? Oh, and I should say I've been to the community practice meetings. I feel the energy as well. And it's really a place where the model is living and breathing and evolving, right? The S2O model. So thanks for that. Anne, is there anything you would add to the definition of S2O and anything about the S2O community of practice?
Yes, well, thank you, Malavika, and thank you, everyone. So I have to say that at EDP Science, we apply, the very same core principles that were defined at the beginning by the pioneers' annual reviews, and that are, reiterated by the S2O community of practice. I would like to add to what Wendy and Richard said. Kind of to focus a little bit more on the, what happened, subscribe to open.
So I think we're losing Anne, probably because of a signal issue. Oh, Anne, are you back?
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I dropped out, did I? So I was saying that the consequences of subscribe to open are that in theory, a journal could be open 1 year and closed another year, which is not ideal. So what we're doing, like the other subscribe to open publishers, is look at possible variations and adaptations that make it more important, more attractive for libraries to continue to subscribe. And we're looking towards the community of practice to see what other publishers are trying, what works, what doesn't work. and to see, you know, how we can adapt, make our model evolve, because at the end of the day, the idea is to be in open access, but to keep being in open access year after year. So, you know, while we uphold the core principles, we're definitely open to adaptations and evolutions in the future.
Thank you, Anne. And speaking of, you know, this importance to stay in open access, as you were talking about, you know, there's a resonance, I think, with a lot of people here sharing this space with us today, because more than a quarter of people have asked us, really, the top question seems to be about sustainability and viability of S2O. You know, does it really work? Can it work over the long term? Those sorts of questions. So it seems to be the overwhelming question about the model, and people even call it wishful thinking aside. What's the evidence? You know, that's how people have asked some of their questions. So Richard, could you start us off by telling us a little bit about what is the evidence that S2O is even viable in the first place and then sustainable over the long term?
Yeah, sure, Malavika. I know that there is some skepticism, and I'm glad that we have the opportunity to address that today. Let me give some hard evidence on S2O's viability. All of the 51 annual reviews titles were published open access under Subscribe to Open in 2023 and 2024. To date, we have offered Subscribe to Open on 121 separate volumes. That's including our pilot program, and every single time it's been successful. Looking more broadly, overall this year, 196 journals from 24 different publishers are using Subscribe to Open. This includes university presses, learned societies, non-profit publishers like us, and crucially, I think, for-profit publishers. Anne represents one, but De Gruyter, I think, are the single biggest S2O publisher. Carger, Sage. Next year, Taylor and Francis are doing a pilot. So I think that none of this is the result of wishful thinking. Rather, it's the result of a group of librarians, publishers, funder representatives, consultants, and many others working together to generate a new approach to open access. S2O is still in the early stages, but I think that it's emerging as a realistic, pragmatic, cost-effective, and equitable approach. In several key respects, it demonstrably improves upon the entrenched approaches to open access.
Great, thank you, Richard. And Wendy, coming to Project Muse, now, how many journals across how many different humanities and social science publishers look set to convert to OA for 2025 under your offer? And while you answer that, could you also tell us what data you've relied on to enable Project Muse to use the S2O route for the titles from different publishers that you represent?
Thank you for the question. So we are in our renewal season right now, and we have more than 100 journals from almost 30 participating publishers in our inaugural launch in 2025. And if we meet our subscription revenue goal for Muse, we will have all current year articles from participating journals will publish open access. So a little bit of background about Muse. We had librarians and publishers come to Muse and ask us to find an equitable solution for OA for journals. And that led us to a feasibility analysis with Raym Crow of the Cambridge Group and some help from the Mellon Foundation. And what we found through that was, to start our journey, we decided to create an offer around our traditional subscription collection of hundreds of journals, basically our complete package. So that means that not every title decided to participate in the offering. And that is mostly the number one reason for that was more about secondary and tertiary revenue streams that publishers had from from things that were not the Muse subscription revenue. So, and the way our model works, we did not have a solution at this time to cover the secondary and tertiary revenue streams. We did go out with an offer of a 3-year royalty guarantee. It was important enough for Muse to also put money behind this. And so we did do a 3-year revenue guarantee for those publishers that decided to participate. And I just want to say one quick story that when we started this, you know, it's difficult in the humanities to find OA solutions for a collection of titles. And when we started, I was like, hey, if we get one humanities title open access, like, to me, that is a success story. So the fact that our first year offer is more than 100 titles, I'm thrilled about that.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Wendy. And I just want to clarify as well, to the best of my understanding, the stats you gave us are different and additional to the stats that Richard gave us, because Richard was talking about journals already offering subscribe to open now in 2024, and that's 196 journals. And now you have talked about in the region of another 100 that hopefully are coming on stream next year.
Right. I'm really hoping for early next year that we are tipping the 300 mark as a community.
Great. Great. Thanks for that clarification. And could you, thinking about viability and sustainability and feasibility of S2O, could you give us the perspective from research and from, titles that maybe are more niche or less well known? Because it's one thing to have S2O for invited review content, and Wendy's talked about the humanities content. How does it look for you and research content?
Yes, thank you, Malavika. So yes, I mean, while we don't have as many journals as Muse and annual reviews under Subscribe to Open, in terms of the number of research articles that we actually publish under S2O, in open access under S2O, I think we're one of the most, one of the most prolific publishers in that respect. So in 2023, we published 2,800 articles in open access under S2O, which is really one of the largest open access output. But to go back to your question, does it work for research content and for more or less niche topics? So at ODP Science, so we have 8 journals published open access under S2O. So these 8 journals publish mainly original research articles. So within these journals, we have one journal which is actually one of the top research journal in its field. So this is the field of astronomy. And we also have some that are less well known. So our S2O experimentation, actually, that started in 2020 and 2021 with maths journals. So at the moment, we've 6 maths journals in S2O. And this is, I would say, our most successful S2O experiment. And the reason for this is, I would say, largely due to the great support we're getting from the mathematics community. So I'd like to thank, I don't know if they are online, but the Society of Applied and Industrial Mathematics in France, which we co-published these journals, which have really made this program successful. We've also found, beyond our own maths journals under S2O, that this model was really considered to be the best fit, for our maths journals, but not just for us. Also, we've started to cooperate with other S2O publishers in mathematics. So I'd like to mention as well EMS Press, the European Mathematical Society, and MSP, the Mathematical Science Publishers in California, who are all under S2O. So I would say in the maths, in the mathematics field, S2O is actually, starting to become one of the standard models of open access. So, it really gives us grounds to hope that this is the right fit for this model. And for us, finally, the latest journal to transition was, admittedly, a more niche journal in the field of radio protection. And with this, we've had challenges which I can talk about later.
Great, thank you, Anne. And yes, we'll come back to the story of radio protection. But if I could now pose a question about how does the model work after the first year or so, right? So Richard, if you could come in and tell us, but basically the question is, how do you even talk to a library about renewals and supporting a journal that for all intents and purposes has already opened under S2O? What does that look like?
I think that's a misunderstanding of the model, if I may say so, Malavika. And we don't really know yet what happens after the first couple of years. We're just going into year 3 of our sales of S2O for our entire portfolio. And over the first 2 years, I think we've been able to identify 3 institutions out of over 3,000 subscribing institutions that dropped their subscriptions with the reason that they didn't support subscribe to open. So we would have seen, and there are other reasons for not subscribing, but we would be in a worse off place, I think, if we weren't using subscribe to open. But what happens in the long term is still an unknown. But how it works is that the library subscriptions themselves open the journal rather than supporting already open journals. It's the positive action that the librarians take to subscribe that's the controlling event to make the journal open every single year. It's important for librarians to realize that whether the journal is open access or not is absolutely in their hands. And we talk to them as much as is possible with our small team in the field. And we provide information on the impact that their decisions are having on access to knowledge locally, nationally, and globally. Actually, I want to quote Ben Ashcroft from De Gruyter, who's got a nice way of putting it. He says that librarian support for S2O is a form of enlightened self-interest, which is where people who act to further the interests of others or the interests of a group to which they belong ultimately serves their own self-interest as well. And my sense is that librarians understand this and they realize what's at stake in maintaining their subscription to S2O journals year on year. In the publishing community, we might express this as doing well by doing good. And that's how I see it from our point of view.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Now, panelist colleagues, we are tracking a little bit behind schedule, and I'm looking as well at the Q&A, and there are some interesting things in there. So if you will bear with me, I will skip now to our next theme around this, what happens when there isn't enough funding, right? So basically, it's all fine until the moment it's not, okay? So when the funding threshold is not met, the subsequent volume of the journal, by the principles of the model, then has to go behind a paywall. And I think, Anne, you've had a version of experience with this, with radio protection. And, I'd like you to share that story with us, but also tell us your thoughts on this, potential for flip-flopping and falling back behind a paywall, and then how do you manage that?
Yes, thank you. So, well, to clarify, I'm going to talk a bit more now about the journal radio protection. So just to clarify to listeners, we weren't in the situation when we had to close a journal that was already opened. What happened was the first year that we launched the journal under S2O, we actually didn't reach our threshold in terms of the number of subscriptions. We had quite a drop in the number of subscriptions the first year. So we decided to stay behind the paywall that year and to offer the journal again the year after. Which is what we did. And the second year then, we launched a call again for subscriptions, and we had, apart from subscriptions, we also had the society owning the journal that provided complementary funding, and we were then able to publish in open access in the second year. So I think our take on this is the first year when we had a negative result in quotes. We thought long and hard about what to do about this, but when we decided to keep the journal closed, we decided to actually communicate about it. We were actually, rather than being a negative result, we received the rather positive comments of people saying that this actually, rather than undermining the S2O model, it strengthens it. It strengthens it. It actually shows the S2O model operating as it should. So our learning experience, I guess, is being transparent about when things work and when things don't work was important, and it's important for the model. But another thing to say is that it's okay to delay the opening of a journal because, before the journal is opened, the journal continues to operate as it did before. But it would certainly be more difficult to close a journal again later if subscriptions decline, below a sustainable level. So I can't really say what would happen then, because as far as I know, there's no example actually of journal having closed again. But this is certainly something that could happen. And to go back to my previous point, adaptations are key to ensure that this doesn't happen. Adaptations and looking also at other sources of funding, complementary funding, are two keys really.
Thank you, Anne. And Wendy, along the same theme, but I'm turning to you because obviously Muse is moving content from many publishers, so maybe there's a heightened level of risk. The question is, how, in your view, can you call a journal OA if the decision about the access and that status potentially could change every year, any year, as as the principle of the model stands? What do you think?
I'll say that under Muse is using the S2O model in a very traditional sense. So the complete run of a journal can't be instantly open access under Muse's use. Only volume years can be. So there is a risk that a title can have volume years open and others closed. And it's a risk I'm willing to take, as the bigger risk is do nothing. And from my perspective, there's no other model on the market that I've discovered that an aggregation can use to assist with open access for multiple titles under one model. And, a lot of the feedback I've heard is about how do we track this? What is the metadata standards around it? And I fully recognize I'm not minimizing the headache of potentially noisy holdings and metadata if we found ourselves under supported in year 2 or year 3. But I believe that to be more of a technical hurdle and not something that I would use as a reason not to make any content available to all.
Great. Thanks for that perspective, Wendy. And I guess, going back to something Anne said, I don't believe between us on this panel, we even know of a journal that has ever fallen behind in a sense. So, there's risk in any model, in every model, right? But Richard, if I can turn to you now for a risk from a different perspective, right? And this is from the library or consortia member perspective. If they want to support open access and they are responding to your offer and pledging money, how do they know that they won't end up supporting a paywalled publication because your thresholds are not going to be met?
Yeah, I think there's a risk that the funding is not adequate. As I mentioned before, our backup is green open access. I think that's not what the subscribers or we want, but it's a backup. We should bear in mind that there are a number of reasons why subscribe to open offerings might not meet meet their financial goals. No publisher has a God-given right to generate the income that they need or that they desire. A field may have cooled and attract less subscribers. Journals can sometimes lose their way for a number of reasons, or of course it could be a collective action issue. So collective action problems are where a group of people, in this case librarians, benefit from working together to achieve a common goal, but specific incentives encourage them to act individually instead of for the common goal. So librarians or libraries could preferentially spend their money on APCs or read and publish deals that would guarantee open access for their research, but at the expense of ensuring that relevant research from other institutions is open. It's my view that since knowledge generation is a collective effort, having open access only for content from well-funded disciplines or from wealthy institutions is really a suboptimal solution, and that this collective action that works across all fields and all types of institutions is preferable. But you know, there's a risk that people will buy into that and at some point may be disappointed.
Thank you, Richard. And also Kate Warlock has shared some other examples, I think, from Kaga and Duke. I'm just dipping very quickly into chat and acknowledging that. But you know, this is all learning, right? And that's what S2O is about, and what the community of practice is about. And I'd like now to move on to, and I think this addresses maybe some of the comments in chat and questions. I'd like to move on to looking at S2O and how it sits alongside a variety of other models in open access, right? So Richard and Anne, what I'm hearing so far is that S2O is an iteration of the old subscriptions model. And I guess, how do you see that and that danger of potentially overburdening libraries in all of this? We have that theme of what about other revenue streams? Wendy was mentioning secondary, tertiary revenue streams, and that's come up in chat and questions as well. What are your views on that?
Well, if I go first, Anne, I mean, yeah. I do see S2O as a creative iteration of subscriptions, and there's a very widely used business model for non-rivalous products where one person's using something that doesn't prevent others from using it. Think of digital music services where customers pay recurring fees to access. The income stream question is really a big one for Subscribe to Open. And something that we haven't talked about yet is that revenue sources for publishers have changed quite a bit in the last decade, with non-library sources, especially APC support from funding agencies, now contributing substantially. I don't know what the actual numbers are, and of course there's very big variation by subject and by country, but maybe a conservative guess would be 25% of publisher income is presently coming from funder-paid support. Subscribe to Open publishers don't have access to this source of support. This is a problem. It's preventing some publishers from experimenting with Subscribe to Open, because even when 100% of the library revenue is retained, the funder revenue from APCs is lost. The Coalition S has made some positive noises about Subscribe to Open, but they haven't come up with any dollar support that would underwrite what's currently given to APCs to the tune of billions of dollars a year. And I really wish that funders would look at this. I also note that Diamond Open Access Publishing, which funders have become very enthused about, shares the feature of no cost to read and no cost to publish. I think there's a lot of common ground there, and I hope that the proponents of the two approaches will begin working together on shared efforts.
Thank you, Richard. And Anne, did you want to come in as well on this?
Yes, I'd like to comment on this. Yeah, so I mean, I'll comment with our own experience. So what we've done for our S2O titles in general is to retain the existing financial structure and the existing funding streams. So the pre-existing, with the notable exception of APCs that are removed, and in some cases, like Richard mentioned, this can be non-trivial. So we've, with this exception of APCs that are removed, we kept the existing financial structure. And this financial structure, this pre-existing financial structure can be complex in some cases. I'll mention in particular our astronomy journal. And that actually leads to quite a few questions from from libraries, from authors, and so on who pays what, and so on. So what I can say as well, apart from this pre-existing structure that is retained in our case, to minimize, I guess, the financial difficulties, is that conversely, we have, by making this transition, we have been able to benefit from subsidies and from support, financial support, in particular from French government and from institutions. So this has, this shows, maybe unlike what Richard was mentioning, noise but no dollars. In our cases, we were quite fortunate to benefit from additional support that was meant to to help, I guess, these kind of virtuous models to succeed. So what we've done as well, which we felt was important, because of this complexity in the existing revenue streams, and because of having also additional subsidies, is to be as as transparent as we could about the various income streams and our publication costs. So we've done this in the form of transparency reports that we publish every year, and this gives, I guess, some feedback to libraries and also to the funders on what we do with the money.
Thank you, Anne. And I was going to later ask a question about transparency that I might skip because in the interest of time, but I'm really glad that you mentioned your transparency reporting. And I think Charlotte has put the link in chat, but Charlotte, if you wouldn't mind putting that in again at this moment, then that would be really helpful. And Wendy, if I now move to you, because I think we will, again, tick off a lot of questions if we get to this point. We've received in the registration process, and we are receiving right now in live conversation, a bunch of questions about the variability within S2O publishing practices, which, as Anne has been talking, adaptations, there are various revenue streams, so this is a live issue, right? But there are some S2O publishers that charge page fees. There are some that offer libraries a publish guarantee, which means their affiliated authors can continue to publish open access even if the funding threshold isn't met. And I guess some people argue that looks more like an RNP deal if the thresholds haven't been met, right? In the face of such variations, I guess the key question is there a worry that the variance in the way S2O is being implemented is actually damaging the initiative as a whole or adding to confusion? What do you think, Wendy?
Okay, apologies up front because I'm going to answer this from both sides of my mouth, so to speak. So, I believe greatly that this is a time, as Anne has mentioned, that people are looking and they're making variants of the model to adapt it to their individual specific needs of their communities, right? And I applaud that. I applaud all effort towards creating the content, moving the content towards open access. However, the diversity in how the model is applied can create confusion, and we've heard this confusion and uncertainty among libraries and other stakeholders, especially when there's significant differences in the practices or the application of the model. I don't want to undermine the initiative. I believe the varieties, the variations, can be an asset if there's transparency and clear communication about each publisher's approach. That said, you know, I believe the community of practice moving towards sort of more towards the best practices and establishing a core set of S2O principles could help mitigate some of the misperceptions and help all of us as a community further this model. So it's both sides. Has it caused confusion? Yes, it has. Is that a bad thing? Not necessarily if we're all moving closer to the goal.
Thank you, Wendy. That's really helpful. And Richard, I don't know if you wanted to come in on that, or Anne, I invite you in case you had any other comments on that point.
Yeah, well, you know, it's not a magic bullet. What Subscribe to Open can do is to utilize the subscription budgets that libraries have got to contribute directly to open access. It doesn't necessarily cover all of the costs because of the way that publishing has changed. And, you know, there is a bit of confusion with the different models. I would give a lot of credit to the organizations who have been brave enough to see the opportunity here and to try and find a way for them to apply it. It's very much easier to sit back and wait and see what happens. I think there's a, you know, there's a lot of determined and smart people involved in this. And of course, we're working very closely with the library community here, and the librarians that have become involved are really helping to guide the process. We do have lots of discussion in the community of practice to set definitions and goals, but I think we want to do that in a way that's very respectful for where people are coming from and what they're trying to achieve. And then the difficult thing and the very important thing is that we communicate clearly what we mean.
Thank you. Yes. The words matter, right? And how we say them matters as well. Thank you for that, Richard. And did you want to come in on anything with regards to this point?
No other comment on that.
Great,
Yeah,
that's
totally.
fine. That's fine. We can move swiftly on. And
what
yes,
Wendy and Richard said.
thank you, Anne. So if what I'd like to do is give us a little bit of time. I have to admit to you all sharing this space that I'm overwhelmed with questions, but hopefully as part of the conversation, we are addressing some of the questions that are occurring. I want to save time if I can. So if panelists can ask you now to move to what we had discussed in terms of a quick fire round, then we can sort of save a bit of time perhaps. So I guess the question at this point is, as a quick reaction from you, what do you see as the biggest enablers for the proliferation of Subscribe to Open? And Anne, as you're on the screen, would you like to go first?
Yes, sure. So for us, I would say the biggest factor, really the biggest enabler, has been the greater or lesser, in some cases, involvement of the research communities behind the you know, that are supporting the S2O model. I mentioned earlier our maths journals. For us, you know, the involvement of the mathematics community, the researchers, but the mathematics libraries as well has made a huge difference. So I mean, the researchers, the research community has, you know, they're of course directly prescribers to the libraries. You know, they have a say in what the libraries support or not, but also in general, their voice is important in kind of the broader open access discussion in general. So, you know, researchers saying, yes, I like S2O, I would like more, you know, I would like more journals to be S2O. I think it helps, yeah.
Great, thank you. Wendy, I think you had pretty much the same view. I'll allow you to come in because I think in discussion you said researchers, what Anne said, is that fair?
Yeah, I'll just add like one very quick anecdote that I'm surprised the question, and maybe it's in the questions, have subscribers walked away because of the S2O model? And I want to say what I'm hearing is actually instances of libraries upgrading their subscriptions to more complete packages to support S2O and have what we're doing at Muse align with their own missions.
Thank you for that, Wendy. Richard.
I'll add two things. First of all, show, don't tell. Demonstrating that it works in practice should increase the impact that the model has. And secondly, transparency and inclusion. I think it's great that that people that are skeptical state their skepticism, and that will either improve the model or convince them or bring it down if they've got a really substantial point. But we'll learn best by being as open as possible.
Great, thank you. And quick reactions again from each of the three of you. Is S2O an evolution or an end game for delivering equitable OA? What are your views? If we go with you, Richard, as you're on the screen already.
Well, I mean, our commitment is to equitable, inclusive, open access, not to any model. At the moment, subscribe to open is the best way for us to achieve that. Actually, I think it's true for all three of us. That's why we're doing it. If a more powerful approach or an integration of approaches emerge that share these principles, then I'll personally be delighted. I think that the community of practice, as has been mentioned several times, is a really important testing ground for these ideas. Everyone's welcome to join and to test out S2O and other approaches, and I hope that you will.
Great, thank you. Wendy?
Definitely an evolution, as we are just now with our first offer. But I've talked a lot about applying this to our complete collection, and there's a lot of other use cases that we still need to solve. And if somebody comes up with a better model for the practice, then so be it. I welcome it, right? So if this is S2O starts the conversation to a better solution, we'll all be in a better place.
Thank you. And Anne?
Yes, so I mean, in our case, so you're asking about the end game. So we have a program of S2O that we're really engaged in, and in almost all our cases, we've been able to deliver open access under S2O with a mix of traditional subscriptions, but also sometimes complementary financial support. So in this respect, I would say I can see maybe a convergence between S2O and Diamond open access or sponsored open access, where, you know, I mean, part of it may come from institutions subscribing, but in a way, it's, you know, it's becoming Diamond. You know, it's like the two models are getting closer in that respect. So while we're at the moment being very careful to distinguish the two models, I can see that, you know, perhaps in the future, this becomes, you know, just one model. And I'd circle back to how you were defining it at the beginning, you know, is free access and free to publish. So, you know, whatever delivers it will be the winning model.
Great, thank you, Anne. And now I have a few minutes and loads of questions to pick from. I'm going to try and pull together a few themes here and ask the panel about this issue of non-contributing institutions and attrition, and you know, how that's managed in S2O, your communications with libraries, but also then the danger of attrition. And I know we've talked, Anne, about maybe a Diamond-esque help coming in there, but you know, any other thoughts? Anyone on the panel?
Yes,
Yeah.
If I'm still on screen, yeah. I will say that I mean, attrition, I think is not necessarily a curse. What we've done, for example, with our maths journals is we started with a situation where we had a low subscriber basis. So what we did is that we partnered with an organization called Knowledge Unlatched, who are specializing in helping journals transition under collective open access models. So this has actually increased the subscriber basis for these journals. So what I mean by that is that attrition is not a curse, is not a necessary evil, but what this requires is a lot of time in messaging, in like tweaking the model, in communication, in adaptation, in a lot of time also for our commercial teams and so on. So we can reverse the the attrition tendency, but it takes a lot of time and resources, and this is where our efforts are.
Thank you for sharing that, Anne. That's instructive. Richard, I know you had some thoughts on non-contributing institutions as well.
Yeah, I mean, institutions will have reasons for making their own decisions. I don't think that we should second guess them. In my city, there's a couple of parks and they have cleanup days twice a year. I didn't go to the last cleanup day, but I still use the park. I don't want my neighbors telling me that I'm a free rider because I didn't go along and help clear up the park. We all benefit from it. I appreciate their contribution. Maybe I contribute in other ways. I can't think what they are off the top of my head. But our job is to be gently persuasive to the libraries that this is a good thing for them to do, and they're free to make their own decisions. And the fact that they can use the content is really the end goal. In our case, we're looking at institutions where there are no subscriptions but substantial usage, and we're asking those institutions to, even if they take out a subscription to 2 or 3 of the titles, they get free access to all of the others, the other 48 or 49. So I still think that they come out ahead. And as well, and well, you might ask a question about finance, so I won't go. That's all I want to say.
Well, my follow-on question was going to be about this issue of affordability and whether I think a lot depends on the specifics of pricing, right? And so what role does your approach to pricing have in the success of the model?
Shall I answer that first?
Go for it. Free for all.
So for us, it hasn't changed our pricing. Moving to subscribe to open isn't more expensive and isn't cheaper than publishing behind the paywall. So there's no impact. I think that's not necessarily true of the other open access models, but I can't back that up. As far as levels of contribution are concerned, we have 6 tiers, and tiers 5 and 6 are about 1/3 of the price of tier 1. About 50% of our income comes from North America, about 27% from Western Europe. I can tell you the numbers: 15% from Asia, 5% from Oceania, 3% from the Middle East. No, 3% from Latin America, 1.5% from the Middle East, 0.6% from Africa. So we draw on support from institutions all over the world. And I think that this is important. It means that research institutions all over the world can have a stake in the conversion to open access, can have a say in what happens. And, we're increasingly aware of the need to make contributions from all over the world open access, and having all parts of the world be stakeholders and have a voice in the transition, and this is one small way of doing that.
Thank you, Richard. Now, in the interest of time, because we only have a few minutes left, if I could actually move to polls, and I don't think that we will have the chance to ask the first question, which was going to be, how much do you think this conversation has helped your understanding? But I hope it has helped your understanding if we skip that and move to asking everyone in the room, and panelists, you are welcome to answer if you like as well, but this is for all our attendees and everyone here. What is the most helpful development or the biggest next priority for how S2O moves forward? And Lachlan, if you could bring the poll up, this is closing poll number 2, and we would like to present you with some options in terms of, and if you could pick 3, if you could pick the 3 things that you think would be most helpful developments for S2O, we didn't have the facility to have a free text option here, but we, thought it would be good to take the temperature of what everybody collected here who is clearly interested in this model. What 3 things do you think are most helpful? That's not to say nothing else is helpful in this list, although you may think that too, but which 3 things do you think are most helpful? And I will give it a few seconds. Hopefully you have been able to engage with this. Lachlan, do we have, right, so we're happy to share the result of this on screen, but for that we do need you to go in and vote, and I think we're only at 30%, but it's really about gauging what you think is most helpful. And of course, if you think that none of this hits the mark, you could put some comments in chat and tell us what else you think. And while I'm waiting for responses, I'll also say the tons of questions that we've had that we haven't had time to get to, I will work with our 3 speakers here, and we will get some written responses. So when we share the outcomes, when we share the recording of this session, we can also share the outcomes of that Q&A with you. So, we do want to come back to your questions, and we really value them. Lachlan, do we have a response on what 3 things are most helpful? Aha, a total spread. A total spread. Look at that. So many things are helpful. Okay, well, this was an interesting exercise, and I think what we would like to do, as I said, is to come back to give you the answers to questions in a written format, and hopefully this has been helpful to you. And thank you so much for your time, panelists. Thank you for everybody who's joined us. I'm handing back to Ruby now, but wonderful to be able to have this discussion. Thank you everyone for your time.